The author behind the book that launched the movie The Blind Side says that no one involved in the story made millions of dollars from the film. Author Michael Lewis, who also wrote the stories, by the way, behind The Big Short and Moneyball, says that after studio fees and taxes, he and the Tuohy family ultimately received around $350,000 each from The Blind Side's profits. And Lewis says that the Tuohys plan to share the royalties equally among the family members, including Oher. However, Oher began declining his royalty checks, at which point the Tuohy family started depositing his share into a trust fund for their son. Here to talk about this case is sports and entertainment attorney Seth Berenzweig. He represents current and former pro athletes and stars, also an expert in the type of arrangement that the Tuohys made with Michael. Seth, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Seth, are all of the receipts available for this? Is the answer to this whole dispute simply in the royalty paperwork, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, I think you're right. I think it probably is in the royalty paperwork, not only in terms of what the actual deal in the contract was, which we suspect was 2.5% of the net profits, but also in terms of just following the money. As Michael Lewis said, and by the way, he's one of the biggest names in this whole picture here as to both the book and the rights and the movie profits. He, if you add everything up in terms of selling the option and the movie profits, is really going to end up making only about $400,000. That's not a small amount of money, but this is a case that really is damages that will likely run into the thousands and not the millions. So I think the thing that's ironic about this case is that it involves a former NFL player, but many of the people that have read this new lawsuit feel like they want to rush in and sack the Tuohys. I think that's a rush to judgment. It's a very serious case, but I think the case really raises more questions than answers. And once they get to the bottom of it, and they will probably, by consent, dissolve the conservatorship in the next couple of weeks, they will get down to the math. But there are a lot of serious questions that need to be answered here.
You know, we know both sides have said their piece. What are you paying attention to? What is sort of making your antenna go up in all of this? And what ultimately do you think will make or break this case?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I have a lot of respect for Michael Oher, and if the allegations are true, which are very serious, then he was taken advantage of, and he certainly has his right to his day in court. And I want to be clear on that. However, I'm a little bit skeptical about the case, and I think he has an uphill battle. He filed this case nearly 20 years after the conservatorship was entered into, so there may be a statute of limitations issue. He might have some responses to that. But on the substance of it, I think that, as we've already discussed, there's not a lot of money at issue in this. And there was nothing necessarily improper by the imposition of a conservatorship. There are grounds where a judge had the authority to enter this in, and this was brought into a courtroom and signed off by a judge. But there will be some serious questions raised. There are some potential irregularities that the family does have to answer. I just think that Mr. Oher may have retained an attorney that really kind of promised him the sun, the moon, and the stars, and he may end up being underwhelmed at the end of the day.
Well, conservatorships certainly in the spotlight now more than ever before, and I think partially thanks to Britney Spears as well. Is this added public scrutiny likely to impact this case in any way?
I think that it does, because people learned a lot about conservatorships. They certainly learned a lot about it through the Britney Spears case. But that also raises an interesting point, because by way of comparison, that conservatorship was very broad and strict. She didn't have the ability to even manage her own business, enter her into her own contracts, make her own doctor's appointment. Michael Oher had the full authority to be able to enter into his own business, sign his own NFL contracts. And in fact, he was probably represented by an NFL Players Association licensed attorney. And in fact, a conservator can't even sign those deals because they're not licensed by the NFLPA. So the long and short of it is that people are learning a lot about conservatorships. This one is very interesting and high level because it also integrates a big Hollywood blockbuster movie that won a ton of awards all over the world. But the reality is that I think there's been a rush to judgment here. There needs to be a lot of serious questions that will be addressed in this new litigation, but I suspect that the family may very well have a lot of the answers to these questions, which, as we've said, are quite serious.
Okay, Seth Berenzweig, appreciate the perspective. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.